Today, I want to go through some data storytelling from the data of police violent deaths. This was a very interesting data set to study and review. I wanted to explore more about any relationships to the causes of deaths. I focused on different elements of this data set and looked for possible relationships and created graphs to support that as well. And so that's what we'll jump into today. And so, to begin, this chart starts us off with kind of the foundation of the problem, you could say. In this chart, we learn about the top 8 causes of death with police violent deaths. Looking at the chart, gunshot clearly is our most common cause of death. Even in some of the combination causes of death, we can see gunshot as another part to it. And so, this is really important foundational knowledge for us as we go throughout the rest of this data set. And so going to the next chart, I took signs of mental illnesses. So I wanted to kind of see what mental illness had an effect to the causes of death. And so in this chart, we learn about the signs of mental illness in the police violent deaths. We can see that the greater portion is no, while there is still fairly a large portion of yes. So we can learn that mental illness may not have a super strong relationship with the cause of death, but there is still a little bit of correlation with that. After searching through the data of mental illness, there were some in that same column of data that reported drug or alcohol abuse. And so that was kind of interesting to me. And looking at the chart, there are a total of 725 of the deaths that had signs of drug or alcohol abuse. And so on our graph, we see that drugs or alcohol bar, which is 725. And then to the right of it, we see the top 4 causes of death that had the most signs of drugs and alcohol, and that was gunshot, and taser, and physical restraint were the highest signs of drug or alcohol abuse, which kind of supports our next few charts that we talk about. The next one was the top 6 initial reasons, and so I pulled the top 6 initial reasons of the cops being there in the first place, and we noticed that traffic stops and domestic disturbance are the top 2, which is pretty common, I feel like. And considering gunshots was our number 1 cause of death, seeing the 6 options here, we can start to kind of see some of a relationship. I mean, we have person with a gun, shooting, shots fired. So it kind of correlates quite well with gunshots being the main cause of death. And so knowing this information, it led me to a few other findings and kind of things that I felt like were important to this data set. And this is the states with most deaths. And so I took the top 4 states that had the most amount of deaths, which were Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas. And obviously, looking at just that chart, it is a little bit like, okay, what do the top 4 states actually have to do with this data set? And it brings us back to the causes of death. And so the main cause of death was gunshots. And so I did a little bit of research just to kind of see what the regulations and laws were with concealed carry for guns in those states. And so for Arizona, we can see that it's permitless 21 and above for concealed carry. Same with Florida and Texas. Whereas California, there's a permit required. And so it's kind of interesting to see how California had the most deaths. So it's kind of interesting that although a permit is required, that gunshot was the greatest cause of death. So that was kind of an interesting thing that I feel like relates back well to our data. And then the next one that I decided to focus on was if the victim was armed or not armed. And so looking at this pie chart, you can see that there is a great portion that were allegedly armed. Some that were unarmed didn't have a weapon. 995 were unclear, and 749 were just in a vehicle. And so we can learn a lot from this chart and the numbers it gives us on the victims being armed. And more than likely, officers are almost always armed. That's something that we always see them have. And so when someone is armed, it honestly makes sense for an officer to be able to pull out their arm as well and use it as defense, which can lead us to see a relationship between this and the amount of gunshot deaths. And so it leads me to my last little point of kind of relationships that I found in the cause of deaths and kind of some correlations. Obviously, I think that last chart that we just looked at with the being armed and not armed, we can see that the highest cause of death was gunshots. And that there were so many armed individuals, which is a potential threat. Something that I don't think is the main finding or the greatest relationship with signs of mental illness and drugs. I do think that those having signs of those in those situations could have an effect on those, but I do think the greatest thing was victims being armed and that being the potential threat. And so these are some of the findings that I found from this data set.